Assalamu alaikum. This is the part one of the series of videos for the chapter number 8 for our fixed income securities course. The chapter name is Term Structure and the Volatility of the Interest Rates. As we know that market participants pay close attention to the yield on treasury securities because the analysis of these yields is critical as these are used to drive the interest rates which are used to value the securities. So we know that we use the yield on zero coupon treasury securities as the treasury spot rates, and the relationship between those spot rates and maturity is referred to as the term structure. The first thing we will be discussing in this chapter is about the theoretical shapes of the yield curve. And as you can see here, as we have already, I think, discussed in our chapter 3, third or fourth chapter about the shapes of the yield curve, when we also discuss about yield curve theories, that there can be four normal shapes. First one is the normal, or we call it a positively sloped yield curve when yield is increasing with maturity, which means investors will be rewarded for holding higher maturity securities. Then we have a flat yield curve where yield for each of the maturity security is same. Regardless of its maturity, the yield is same. Then we have a downward sloping or negatively sloped yield curve, which we call inverted yield curve. Here, the yield on short-term maturities is higher as compared to the longer maturities. Finally, we have a humped yield curve. In a humped yield curve, the yields increase with maturity for a range of maturities, and then yield curve become inverted. So you can see it's increasing for different maturities, and then it becomes inverted. Sorry. So this is the four types of different yield curve. Here, one thing is very important to understand, and that thing is the what we call the slope of the yield curve, or the steepness of the yield curve, which is measured as between the difference between the yield of highest maturity security and the lowest maturity security. So the difference between these two yields is called the slope or the steepness of the yield curve. Different market participants use different conventions. So, for example, in US, some market participants use for the long-term maturity bond, they use a 30-year bond, and for the short-term maturity yield, they use 3-month table rate. Some other market participants use 2-year yield for the short term. Some use 10-year treasuries for the long term. So it really depends on who is using these yield curves. The second thing, important thing, is these yield curve shifts. What we mean by yield curve shifts is change in the yield for each treasury maturity. There can be two type of shifts. One is the parallel, just like this, upward and downward sloping, upward and downward shift, parallel shift. Then we have non-parallel shift, just like this. So yield is not increasing with the same amount of basis points along the curve. But here you can see yield is increasing or decreasing with the same basis point for each type of maturity. But for the non-parallel shift, it's not true. In the non-parallel shift, we again have two different types. One is because of the twist in the slope of the yield curve. So you can see here is a twist in the slope of the yield curve. So this is a flattening of the curve, where we see that the slope has decreased. Which means that the difference between here and here is lower as compared to the difference between here and here, right? So the difference between long-term yield and short-term yield has decreased, and its reverse will be the steepening of the yield curve, which is happening here. The difference between long term and short term is increasing. So its difference between long term yield and short term yield is low here as compared to here. It's increasing, and we call it steepening of the yield curve. The other type of parallel shift is the change in the curvature or the humpness of the curve, and we refer to it as butterfly shifts, right? So the positive butterfly shift is the yields on long-term and short-term bonds are increasing or decreasing more as compared to the yield on the intermediate term bond. So the positive butterfly shift is become less hump. So it means that if yields increase, the yield in the short maturity and the long maturity sector increase more than the yield on the intermediate sector. And if you decrease, the yield in the short and long maturity decrease less than the intermediate sector, right? So if yields increase, they increase more than the intermediate, but if they decrease less than the intermediate sector, right? So that's what we call a hump. Similarly, that we call a positive butterfly shift for the hump curve. Then we have a negative butterfly, means yield curve becomes more hump. So for the positive, it becomes less hump. For negative, it becomes more hump. So if for a negative butterfly shift, so if yields increase, yields in the intermediate maturity sector will increase more than the yields in the short-term maturity and long-term maturity sector. But if yields are decreasing, they will decrease less for the intermediate sector than the short-term and long-term maturity sector, just like here. So this is all about the yield curve shifts. Then you can see a section in the book which is the treasury return resulting from yield curve movements. This section really discuss about the determinants of the returns. So there are three main factors that affect the zero coupon treasuries, return on the zero coupon treasuries: level of the rates, the slope of the yield curve, and the curvature of the yield curve. You can you go through the text in the chapter to make sense of this. In our next video, we will be discussing about the measurement of or the construction of the theoretical spot rate. Thank you.